David, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Edmonton, who, whilst I don't agree with all of the points raised in her speech, it is clear through her time both as an MP, formerly as a councillor, and some of the issues raised in that speech, that she is a passionate campaigner in this area, particularly for vulnerable claimants within her constituency, and I do pay genuine tribute to her in that area. Now, I'm not the Minister responsible ultimately for universal credit, for which the speech predominantly focused on, but I do represent vulnerable claimants who go through the universal credit process as part of my portfolio. So I recognise some of the issues pointed up, and I will talk about some of the very specific asks that have been done where actually there is much agreement. But first of all, it is fair to remind that there was cross-party support for the principle of universal credit to offer the personalised, tailored support, that stakeholders broadly support that principle, but it doesn't mean all is right. But we mustn't forget that legacy benefits were not the panacea of a utopian state where everything was great. It was incredibly complicated. It was 6 different benefits, 3 different agencies, DWP, HMRC, local authorities. And you had to be a nuclear physicist to be able to navigate them, whether you were the claimant or whether you were us as MPs or our staff trying to support predominantly vulnerable claimants doing that. And the figures bore out that we saw typically 700,000 claimants a year missing out on £2.4 billion worth of benefit support that we've all voted for to give to people because we recognise that's the right thing. And that was worth about £280 per month for those 700,000 claimants who were predominantly vulnerable claimants. There was the 90% tax rate for some claimants. There were the well-known problems with the cliff edges at 16, 24 and 30 hours. And we will have seen through our casework where people wanting to do the right thing, trying to improve their opportunities in life, and the system was working against them. And therefore, universal credit was brought forward, as I said, broadly with cross-party support. And all the way through, it has been right that we've looked at this as a test and learn, which is why it is important that the Honourable Member has raised the experiences that she has had directly and of her office. And we have already made some significant improvements. We made, rightly, the changes to advance payments that were always there, but you had to know to ask. So unsurprising, very few people did. So it is now rightly, automatically part of that initial interview with the work coach. Unsurprisingly, the take-up rates of the advance payments have significantly improved. Initially, that would then be repaid over 6 months. Rightly, it was moved to 12 months, and rightly, it's now moved to 16 months. The rate it's repaid has also been reduced, and also we've strengthened the discretion to take into account if there's particular hardships to make sure we are not compounding a problem. Rightly, for those who are transferring over from legacy benefits, if you're on housing benefit, you will get an additional 2 weeks' worth of housing benefit money, no strings attached, additional money. And also, as the regulations come forward, an additional 2 weeks for those on ESA, JSA or income support, again, no strings attached. Now, that's worth typically £237 on housing benefit, £200 on ESA, JSA, IS. I would urge colleagues opposite that when seeking to oppose often what the government does, this is something that they should be supporting. We've scrapped, I will take some minutes, let me just cover this bit, and I will do. We've scrapped the 7 days waiting. We've strengthened the alternate payments, both in terms of on housing costs direct to the landlord, particularly if it was a legacy claimant who was already having that. There will now be a presumption that we should at least have that conversation to see if that is right, and also the frequency of payments, particularly for those who might struggle with just monthly payments, having been used to having a more frequent payment. There's the extra work allowance. We've made changes to the exemptions for the minimum income floor for self-employed claimants and additional protections for those on severe disability premiums. But there is still more to do.
Given way. And just to say, the advance payments are still a loan, and that is a crucial point that the member for Edmonton made. But my question is this: those people who are being managed through their migration to universal credit will have protections. Those people who have naturally migrated to universal credit through change of circumstance, but not always, will not have those protections. What is the justification for that? Because many of my constituents are worse off.
So it is, as the honourable member has said, it's to do with those change of circumstances. So the transitional arrangements were put in place for those who were transferring as part of natural migration, which rightly we have confirmed will be ring-fenced to just the 10,000 this year, so we can get a real deep dive to look at exactly the levels of support that needs to be done, which I'll come back onto more in a moment. But on that wider point of why we're not transitional arrangements put in, because it was recognised that there would be a change of circumstances. Now, what we are seeing is a lot benefit, some and the other way, but overall we are now spending an additional, and this is before the extra money coming in, an additional £2 billion on the current benefits than on the legacy benefits. So there is more people going to the people who need that help. But I want to now specifically on the bits where I think there is some sort of agreement. Now we talk about the office casework, and we all have busy offices, and we have to prioritise casework and supporting our constituencies. I know, as an MP, very proudly, I was rated 3rd out of 650 by theyworkforyou.com on helping them, so I absolutely understand the importance of casework, and what I do is one of my members of staff specialises in this area, with me has visited the job centre, has talked to the partnership manager. We all have a partnership manager, and they are that point of contact for which you can escalate. And I would say to them, I know she was due to do a visit to the job centre in December 2017, and for reasons that visit was cancelled. I would encourage her and her staff. That was my understanding. It's really important because they are there to help. And that point about escalating, that where we've got specific cases that just don't seem right, you can actually talk to the senior people in your respective job centres, and they can then help take that forward. Now, on the point about digital by default, I have a lot of sympathy with this point that's been raised. The principle of this is it was to mirror the world of work, because predominantly most workplaces now expect you to have a reasonable level of digital engagement. However, that is not the case for all people, because not all people on universal credit will ultimately end in work, even if that is their ultimate aim. Not everybody's going to be, and not everybody has got it overnight. And I do think that we need to improve the communication to advise that there are alternatives, that claimants can access support via the telephone, face-to-face, home visits. And I think we do need to do better at promoting that. And I think that is certainly something that I will continue to push on. And we also need to look about the issue about consent. One of the complications with the GPDR regulations is that we now need implicit consent. Because I regularly meet with stakeholders who say, look, we represent many of your vulnerable claimants, particularly housing associations, local authorities, and we want to help. We've got the resource to help. We've got teams. But unless we know that one of the people that we're working with is about to either be migrated, come onto universal credit, accessing an advance payment, how can we help? We have got to find a way, and I think it should be done the same as we've done with advance payments. Make it an automatic part of the initial interview to ask for implicit consent to get those support organisations to work with them, because it's a resource wanting to support claimants, and we should be doing everything we can to match that up. We have made a significant announcement in terms of putting citizens' advice into every single job centre throughout the country. They will be an independent organisation. We will cover their costs. That will start as of April. I welcome that. But as part of this test and learn with the 10,000, I want to look closely at exactly how much time they are able to have with vulnerable claimants. Is it enough? Is there other things that could be done? And I think we should look very, very carefully at that. And I recognise, yes.
The advanced loans that are given to do with the 5 weeks delay, the advanced loans still take 5 days. Would the member agree that that is just too long? What are people expected to do during that period?
I thank the honourable member. Actually, advance payments, if somebody is in particular hardship, can actually get access to money within a couple of hours if they are in particular hardship. So that is an option. I'm not sure how well that's been communicated, but that is the rules that are in place for those who genuinely need that. I also think that we rightly should continue to work with stakeholders. I'm very receptive to meeting with stakeholders. Throughout the week, I'm meeting with different groups. Often will come and rightly challenge the government and hold our feet to the coals. And that's right to do that because they are identifying. And I've actually looked in a number of cases where stakeholders got particular expertise to help then rewrite and deliver our training. Let me just finish the point and then I will. For example, on the very important issue of domestic abuse, I've been working very closely with Women's Aid, Refuge and Mankind, who've gone over all of the training documents, sat through what would be a typical claimant's experience to identify whether our things are in place, and we are looking to bring further improvements based on their expertise.
Minister, I just wanted to put on record, I was never a councillor.
Apologies.
And also, in regards to visiting the job centre, there was a threat of closure. So in between that time, I think the visit kind of got dropped, but it wasn't due to me not wanting to go there. And will the Minister respond to my question on whether there will be a helpline put in place?
Okay. Well, I'm sorry that the Honourable Member wasn't. I was a councillor before. I enjoyed it very much. I'm sorry she missed out on that opportunity. I didn't pass judgment on why the visit. I just said it would be good if one should have it. And I personally, as a backbench MP, benefited from that visit. In terms of the helpline, so the issue with the national helpline, which I brought in to do with PIP when I was a disability minister, it's a little bit different because that was national sort of one-size-fits-all rules on PIP. With universal credit, because it's personalised and tailored, you need to speak in effect to the work coach. So what is in place is that there will be a partnership manager in every single job centre who should be your point of contact. What we recognised by coincidence earlier in this week is we suspect not all MPs necessarily know who their partnership manager is, and the Minister for Employment responsible for UC has committed to share that to make sure that we all have that point of contact because they are there to help. And in the final part, I would just pick up a few points in terms of income inequality has fallen under this government, having risen under the last Labour government, and that the average income of the poorest fifth in this country is now up by £400 a year in real terms, while the highest, the richest fifth, is down by £800. We now have 1 million fewer people in absolute poverty, including 300,000 children. There is still much more to do. I pay tribute to the Honourable Member who did, through her wealth of experience, I thought a very constructive speech. I hope she can see that many of the points raised are things that we are actively looking to do. It is absolutely vital for all claimants and in particular vulnerable claimants. And I thank you, Sir David, for this opportunity to set out what the government is doing.